As you've probably heard in the last few days, Knights of the Old Republic is officially getting a remake. This has been something that people have been speculating about for a couple years now, I think, but we have official confirmation, which is really cool. So there are a few things we know about this and lots of things we don't. I just wanted to quickly go over some of the information we do have, what we don't have, and what seems to be relatively safe to assume based on the information that we do have. The actual announcement so far was done in the form of a really quick cinematic trailer, which I have playing in the background of the video here. There isn't a huge amount of information unless you are new to the concept of Revan, so you can see Revan here in the trailer, and that's about it. This was announced via a Sony event, so the fact that it says it's a PS5 exclusive has caused a little bit of worry, and admittedly I'd be pretty disappointed as well if it was something that was only ever coming out on the PS5, but if we go to some of the other media releases that have happened with this, there is a PlayStation blog post that has some more information that we're going to talk mostly about, and there's also a tweet from Lucasfilm Games, the kind of resurrected publishing house for Star Wars games within Disney now, or within Lucasfilm directly. So the important bit of information here comes from the PlayStation blog post, which says it's a console exclusive on PlayStation 5 at launch. So I think there's a few hints here, along with the post from Lucasfilm Games, which says it's going to be on PlayStation 5 and PC, with no information added in that tweet about like what's going to be where at launch. And that kind of leads me to believe that the game will launch as PS5 and PC and then get an Xbox release and maybe even a Switch release later. Microsoft has used the language of console exclusive for a lot of their titles when they've been doing pretty much joint releases on console and PC. So console exclusive, the fact that they are making that so explicit rather than just saying exclusive on PlayStation 5 at launch, does lead me to believe that there will probably be a PC version right away, especially with the Lucasfilm Games not making any release window distinctions there. Again, that could be entirely wrong. It could just be out on PlayStation 5 at launch and then on PC and Xbox later, but the wording there, to me at least, implies that this is the direction it's going to go. So again, grain of salt, huge grain of salt, maybe the whole shaker, but I don't think it'll just be PS5 even at launch. I really think if this was going to be truly exclusive like that, they wouldn't word it in a way that could be taken another way. They would want to get as much publicity out of that as possible. Now, as far as what we know about the game itself, we don't have a huge amount of information, but there are some things that we do know. The game is being made by Aspyr, who has done a lot of ports of Star Wars games in the past, including working on previous KotOR ports, but they've said that this is a much bigger project in scope than any of those. It also seems like this isn't going to be a simple remaster. When they're remaking a game like this, you can usually expect it to be a graphical upgrade and not much else. Our main indicator of this has come from one sentence in the blog post saying, "We're rebuilding one of the greatest RPGs of all time for a new generation with modern tech, features, visuals, and more, while maintaining the integrity of the story and characters we've come to cherish." So what they've said there is essentially that they're focusing on, as far as what they're keeping, the story and characters. They haven't said that they are maintaining the gameplay directly. So it does seem like that would be a pretty reasonable assumption that they're going to have some updated gameplay, especially because they do say modern features in that list of things that are actually changing. It isn't just a visual remake of the game. At this point, it'd be impossible to say what the scope of that actually includes, whether that means either massive changes to the locations, combat, or whatever, but I personally hope that the combat gets a bit of a facelift in particular. There are a lot of things to love about KotOR, and as someone who enjoys tabletop RPGs, which KotOR's combat is somewhat based off of with a few missing elements, I do think that the combat doesn't hold up the best. I've recently played through both KotOR and KotOR 2, and when the most intense combat moments kind of come from running around a table and trying to lob grenades back while your party's dead and you're trying to avoid having one last hit come in, I think that there's a lot to improve there, and I hope that if they're going to change something, that would kind of be an area that gets some focus. I know there are a lot of people who do really enjoy the KotOR combat too, so who knows what's going to happen. The important point there does seem to be that there will be something changing. It won't just be a direct remaster. It seems to be bigger in scope than, for example, Mass Effect Legendary Edition was. There was also an article on StarWars.com, which I'll link in the description, that includes some interviews with Ryan Treadwell, who's the lead producer at Aspyr as well. While we have no real indication of what the release for this game will be, or when the release will be, Ryan does say the game has been in production for a little while, and they do talk about how they've focused on some of the early decisions, which does imply even more that there's going to be more of a redesign from the ground up. In this interview, Orion Kellogg was also taking part, the executive producer at Lucasfilm Games, or an executive producer at Lucasfilm Games, and he said, "Some of my favorite meetings to have in my week right now are to get into the nitty-gritty with Aspyr and talk about why did we make that choice in the original game, and how does that play today? How do we expand that choice and make it even more meaningful and impactful? We think about literally every word of dialogue and other choices down to the clothes that the character is wearing." So that does seem to confirm that there's a much broader scope going on here beyond just a graphical upgrade. They'd probably still have some of these meetings related to just the visuals of the game if it was just going to be a complete remaster like that. But if they're talking about the dialogue, the choices you're making, and trying to figure out like what's there and why, then it makes a lot of sense that they'd be doing a much broader scope of work. I think there's an idea here of the element of, are you making the game that existed as it was, or are you kind of making the game that fans think of more in their head? There are a lot of games that come out with remakes or remasters later that are very true to the originals, and there's a lot of value in that, but that can also lead to some people who maybe haven't played it in 15 years going back to it and saying, this isn't quite the game that I'd built up in my head, or new fans coming and thinking that it is a bit outdated if you don't have that original viewpoint going in. So it'll be interesting to see what directions that goes in. The other major question that does seem to come up a lot around this is whether or not the game is being moved to Canon by being remade like this. I personally think that everything is currently indicating that it is going to remain a Legends story. Maybe there'll be some elements of new canon kind of thrown in the form of items or something, but I think it's a pretty safe bet that this is remaining in the Legends realm. Well, it is much bigger scope than any of the console ports that have happened before, like the Republic Commando one, the KotOR ones that have happened recently. It does seem like it's still in that category, where those games being re-released doesn't necessarily make them part of the new canon. That being said, it's an area that hasn't really been covered very much in new canon. Nothing before the High Republic has really been set in stone so far. So a lot of elements of KotOR and even Tor could probably be brought in pretty easily. There have been direct references and name drops of certain characters like Revan. So a lot of these characters probably do exist, it's just we don't know what form they take in the new canon, what elements of their story are the same or different. But either way, that's everything I know about the project. Let me know what you think in the comments. Is there a part of the game you'd like to see change or stay the same? What do you think about the exclusivity thing? Do you think it'll come to PC initially, or do you think it'll be more of a later term thing when it comes to presumably Xbox as well? Thanks for watching, hope to see you next time.